Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by the youngster Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter. What's going on in the great state of Florida today, my friend?
Bunch of 90-degree weather. That's all I know. I mean, I drive to work, and you mentioned to me in previous weeks about your air conditioning and how it doesn't really blow cold air, which is kind of troubling since summer's pretty much here now that it's almost June. And
it hasn't been fixed yet. It's still doing the same
thing. So I mean, I'll drive to work, and it'll be 80s at 4:50 in the morning. And, I'm basically hot going into work, and then they don't turn the air on until the store actually opens. So I'm basically running around there doing stuff until the store opens and sweating. And so not too much except hot weather, but I'm glad to be indoors in nice, comfortable air conditioning in my house, in this room, this little office room I have with a TV, my little setup, office desk, talking sports with you, Troy. Always a pleasure for me. What about you?
Yeah, I enjoy this time of the week when you and I get together and talk sports. It's always great. Not a lot going on in the Big Ten. It was Memorial Day weekend, Big Ten tournament for baseball, but some of the, non-major revenue sports, that's how I'm going to put it, non-major revenue sports, because most of them produce revenue with ticket sales, but just they're not going to pack in 60,000 people to watch a lacrosse game. But there's some tournaments going on for those non-major revenue sports. It was Memorial Day weekend. I'll tell you, I hope you had a good Memorial Day weekend. I do want to say we're recording this on Tuesday. Thank you to all the men and women who have served, are serving. I know it's Memorial Day, but I just appreciate all of the men and women that have served our country. Some of my family members have been in the armed forces, so thank you to everyone out there that has served in the armed forces. Kevin, I will tell you, yes, how things were. I don't know how things are. Good thing that I'm not in a beauty pageant, because I was doing some yard work this weekend and I was pulling weeds, and I woke up this morning and I have it looks like zits all over my forearms and wrists, and I think I got attacked by something, or I'm allergic to a weed or a plant in my yard, and it just looks horrid. It really looks like I have the chicken pox. It's terrible, and it itches. So today at work, I brought anti-itch cream with me to work, and I've used a half a tube all day on my forearms and wrists. But this is a sports show, so we're going to move forward, and I'm going to turn it back over to you. With your new gig, you are following the Big Ten on a daily basis with your new gig. That's great. Awesome. And there are some of those non-major revenue sports that are going through tournament time, and then we're going to talk Big Ten baseball, and we're going to talk College World Series. So I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, basically any time I'm running a shift with this new Big Ten site, I'm covering whatever. And, whether that's lacrosse, men's, women's lacrosse, women's tennis, softball, baseball. I actually did a lot of Big Ten baseball stuff, going through live stats and watching some of the games and seeing, the headlines and seeing who wins and updating the site as the Big Ten tournament goes along. I was doing a lot of that this past weekend. So we're definitely going to get into a little bit of baseball now that there's, it's down to 64 teams. You take out baseball or basketball and football, as Troy mentioned, the enormous, revenue makers for college sports, and baseball's probably third on the list in my opinion. I would assume the College World Series for baseball gets a lot of notoriety, and basically all of these games are on some sort of watch ESPN, ESPNU, ESPN3. The NCAA tournament for college baseball definitely gets some TV coverage from across all these 64 teams get on TV, and you can actually see their games. So that's not how it is for a lot of these non-major revenue sports, as Troy put it. Obviously, you have baseball or basketball and football, which are the monsters. But baseball down to 64 teams. The Big Ten tournament was this past weekend. We'll get into that. For softball, though, there is no Big Ten no Big Ten softball team in the College World Series. So that's softball, Big Ten, just it's over. Women's tennis, and I'll get to lacrosse in a bit. That's kind of the other major headline. But women's tennis, Michigan's Brienne Minor won the singles title. And kind of interesting, when I read it, I didn't do any, reporting, any research whatsoever on this title from Michigan's Brianne Miner winning her singles title, but she was the number 24 ranked player, and she won the title. So to kind of equate it to, and, it's an impossible parallel to draw, but the March Madness tournament, when you talk about college basketball, imagine the 24th best team winning the entire thing. That's basically a 6 seed. If you equate it, the top 4 seeds are 1s, 5 through 8 are 2s, 9 through 12 are 3s, and so on. The number 24 ranked player in women's tennis, that was Michigan's Brianne Miner. Again, hats off to her. She won the whole thing. She won the singles title. So being the number 24 ranked player, obviously shoved the odds aside and said, actually, I'm the best player for at least this tournament, and that's the major tournament that mattered in women's tennis this year. So hats off to her and Ohio State's doubles team. I may butcher this name, or both of these names actually, but Francesca Di Lorenzo and Miho Kawase of Ohio State. That doubles team also won the NCAA title, again, for doubles. So hats off to them. Obviously, Big Ten doing some big things in women's tennis. Lacrosse as well. Maryland women's lacrosse won the national title. They had a perfect season. They didn't lose all year long. So obviously, hats off to them. Congrats on that. Perfect season, winning the national title. And then I believe it was 2 days later, it might have been 1 day later, 2 days later, the Maryland men's team also won the national title. So state of Maryland doing quite well. Terrapins just ruling the lacrosse world in 2017, obviously. Again, Maryland women's lacrosse, perfect season, won the national title. Men's team didn't go perfect, but still won the national title. So not too shabby. Maryland men's team actually beat Ohio State, in the title game. I think Ohio State was like a 3 seed or something going into this men's tournament for lacrosse, and got all the way to the title game. Maryland was a top seed and won the whole thing. So hats off to Terrapins lacrosse. And with baseball now, so softball done. That's over with for Big Ten teams. All of them are eliminated. Women's tennis, Michigan singles, Ohio State doubles, Maryland's lacrosse, both men's and women's. Awesome stuff there. Getting into baseball, though, Troy, I'll actually shut up for a while, but to give an update for Big Ten baseball, Iowa beat Northwestern in the Big Ten baseball title game. So the Big Ten tournament went on this past weekend, and Iowa's Jake Adams, the guy that I was talking about a week ago, I said I believe it's Jake Adams, but I kind of forgot his name. That was last week. This week, I'm on top of things. Jake Adams has 27 home runs. He had a homer in the 7th inning of the title game over Northwestern, and he had a home run the very next inning in the 8th inning. Iowa was up like 8-1 going into the 7th inning. He had a homer, and then the 8th inning, he added another homer. So he has 27 on the year. I think the next most, at least last week, was 15. I'm not sure if, that got bumped up to 16 or 17, but Jake Adams with 27 now, tied for the most in single season within the Big Ten, so ever. 27 home runs, Jake Adams from Iowa, the Big Ten winner from this past weekend's tournament, the Big Ten tournament for baseball. He has 27 home runs. That ties the most ever home runs in a single season in the Big Ten. So shout out to him for that accomplishment. He also ties the national lead this year, but out of all of Big Ten baseball history, Jake Adams is tied for the most with 27. Iowa still has at least a couple games left to play. It's double elimination style now that we're in the NCAA tournament. And he, to me, it would surprise me if he didn't end up with 28. I mean, he just a monster this past weekend, been a monster all season long. He's hitting, I think it's over 340 on the season, so he's not your, Adam Dunn guy hitting 200, but hitting a bunch of bombs or striking out. He's actually a productive hitter outside of the long ball. Showed that this past weekend. That's why Iowa, as the number 5 seed in the Big Ten tournament, won the whole thing, beating Northwestern. So that got them an automatic qualifier to the NCAA tournament. And Iowa was one of 5 teams of the 64 within the NCAA tournament that are in the Big Ten. Nebraska, Indiana, Michigan, Maryland are the other 4, and then Iowa was the automatic clincher for the Big Ten, thanks to winning the Big Ten tournament. So all 5 of those teams, Troy, make up the 64-team field for the NCAA tournament for baseball.
Yeah, pretty impressive. At 5 teams in. I mean, you look at it, 64 teams. Those that follow college basketball, 64 teams. 5 teams out of the Big Ten getting into that tournament. As a Midwestern school, I really look at it this way, Kevin. I think sometimes the Midwest, Northeast schools for baseball have a disadvantage unless you can afford to have an indoor practice facility due to weather. I talked to Kurt Augustinelli on my other show that I do on Saturdays. You've met Kurt. You've been on the show. You've talked to him. And for spring sports, for girls and boys, softball and baseball respectively, sometimes the weather can really hamper the practice times. And for Midwest schools and Northeast schools, not knowing what the weather's going to be like in the spring, there is a difference between practicing indoors and practicing outdoors. So to have 5 Big Ten teams in the national tournament, Kevin, my hat's off to that, because it's not like playing in the South or playing out West where you can basically be outside practicing on a full field all the time. And I don't know how many of these, schools are able to practice indoors, but I still give my hats off due to weather. And the one thing is, Big Ten baseball is not one of those things that has been a dominant force nationwide over the years. So it's exciting to see Big Ten teams in there, but it's not often you turn on like the College World Series finals and see a lot of Big Ten teams in there. But it's great that they have made the field of 64. And the way that they set it up, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I really like the way the setup is with the little pods, like you call it, 16 groups of 4. And then, the winner of that moves on to a 16-team single elimination tournament. I like the setup for baseball. What do you think?
I like it as well. And before I get into that, I think it's interesting too, the point you made. And before getting into these regionals, just looking at the regional hosts and practice times, and I also, I'm not just a co-host of the show. I have other jobs, as you guys have listened to our show for many a month and keep coming back to listen to Troy and I's unbelievable podcast that we put on every Saturday. You understand that we have other jobs outside of this, and I cover 3 different Wisconsin high schools, and one of the high schools, their track team, essentially my head sports editor, I'm just, one of the little freelance guys covering sports from Florida in a Wisconsin paper. So I just freelance write. My head sports editor, who, is in charge of like 9 or 8 different newspapers overall, our little company that we have in Wisconsin, he mentioned to me in an email, he said, hey, this school doesn't have a track team, I heard. That might be a cool story to run, because this is not a big school whatsoever, but a Division 2-ish, 3-ish size school that is kind of small for their conference, but definitely bigger than, some of the other D3 schools and D4 schools in Wisconsin. And, this team doesn't have a track team, I heard. And I responded with, well, yeah, they actually do have a track team. They just haven't really competed. They competed in like 2 little meets. Basically, 2/3 of the season, the track season, this spring was already completed, and they competed in 2 meets out of 2/3 of the season being completed. It was a little less than that, but that's kind of the point where like weather just completely took over. And I think they had, some ridiculous shooting went on at a nearby gas station next to the school or something like that. That also hindered their practice time outdoors because that guy got away. Something else crazy happened, but weather was also a part of it. And so it just goes to show you that in the Midwest, again, and we talked about this last week, and how I thought that Big Ten quarterback play going forward wouldn't necessarily take that big step up because they want to be in warm weather and be able to throw the ball 40 times a game. Or not even necessarily 40 times a game, but at least have the opportunity to, and to not have to worry about throwing it in 20-degree weather. I think weather plays a big part as to how the Big Ten is situated, not only in football, obviously basketball is different since everyone's playing indoors, but these sports like baseball, softball, you don't have typical dominance because, if you're a big-time baseball or softball player, you want to go to the West Coast or the East Coast or stay down south, where it's just warmer more of the time, so you can practice more the way you want to, as opposed to being hindered by the weather. That's just a part of Big Ten life. So whenever a Big Ten school does extremely well, even tennis, I think it's impressive that you have a singles winner coming from the Big Ten, and doubles. A lot of tennis meets are typically scheduled outdoors, and then they might, if possible, be moved indoors. If there's, ridiculous snow going into May or something, or rain, or it's, 38 degrees, so it's not snowing, but it's extremely windy and cold. There's just weather plays a big part, as Troy mentioned, as I just mentioned. So looking at these regional sites for baseball, there's 16 of them. As Troy said, 16 little pods of 4. And then you have the best 16 teams out of those pods of 4 move on. You have the best team in those pods of 4 move on. Basically, it's a little double elimination round for those pods of 4. And so just looking at the regional hosts, to finally get to my point here, LSU, Southern, North Carolina, East Coast, Clemson, East Coast, Oregon State on the West Coast, Arkansas, South, TCU, South, Florida, South, Southern Mississippi, South, Houston, South, Kentucky, South, Long Beach State, West Coast, Louisville, again, basically South, Texas Tech, South, Stanford, West Coast, Florida State, South, Wake Forest, East Coast. Those are your 16 regional hosts. There is no northern school. There's no northeast school. There's no even real Midwest, Kansas, Nebraska hosting. There's not one of the 16 hosts. There's no, the top 8 seeds that are just, picked by the committee. You got Oregon State, North Carolina, Florida, LSU, Texas Tech, TCU, Louisville, Stanford, and then you've got those other 8 hosting these regionals, making up those 16 pods. Again, none of them have to face cold weather year in, year out, or throughout the year, month in, month out, basically outside of the dead summer months. So, again, as Troy mentioned, hats off to the 5 Big Ten teams that made it into this tournament, because realistically, geographically, it's not fair. But that's part of life. That's part of sports. Not everything is fair.
Fair schmear. Fair schmear.
Exactly.
Nothing's
so
fair in the world.
So you've got these teams making up these pods of 4. And so Iowa, the Big Ten winner, the 5 seed in the Big Ten tournament, actually got the lowest seed of these 5 Big Ten teams that made it into the field of 64. They were a 4 seed, which I found a little odd. I think Iowa probably underappreciated as a 4 seed, but they were a 5 seed throughout the course of the year in the Big Ten tournament for a reason. Obviously, they didn't dominate. Nebraska was the top team. They were the number 1 seed in this past weekend's Big Ten tournament. Thanks to their regular season play, they ended up as a 2 seed. So that's certainly solid. Indiana was a 2 seed, Michigan a 3 seed, Maryland also a 3 seed, and then Iowa, again, the Big Ten tournament winners, were a 4 seed. I don't think it was a crazy fluke. I think Iowa obviously has some offensive power. Pitching-wise, certainly interesting. Their top pitcher obviously did well during this Big Ten tournament. Not obviously, but he did. So Iowa looked like a very solid team to me. Again, just, going up against some of these other juggernauts, you're not going to have Big Ten teams probably match up in double elimination style with teams like Oregon State, North Carolina, Florida, LSU, Texas Tech, TCU, Louisville, Stanford. Those are your top 8. The Big Ten teams are not better than those teams as far as just my limited knowledge, but there's a reason why those teams are the top seeds. Obviously, even in softball, a 15 seed beat a 2 seed in a double elimination style. So it is certainly possible, but the top 16 teams that are hosting these regionals, just to point Troy's point out, they're all East Coast, West Coast, or South. None of them are dead in the Midwest or in the North, Northeast, Northwest. It just doesn't happen because of the weather. So I thought that was an excellent point. And again, to answer your question, I do like the setup of having double elimination. It makes the games interesting, where just because you have one ridiculous upset doesn't mean you're automatically the better team and you move on to the next round. You got to kind of prove it, which I think is cool. It's certainly a small end type of playoff thing where it's kind of like a best of three, although you're not even playing every team twice. But you're getting the best of these little 4-team pods. You're getting the best team of them, at least for that weekend or, later part of the week that they're playing. I know the NCAA tournament starts, I think one of the pods of 16 starts on Thursday, and then the other 15 start on Friday. So it's interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I think that let me see here before I hand it back to you, Troy. The left side of the bracket that makes up the 32 teams, Nebraska is a 2 seed in their pod with Oregon State, the number 1 ranked team. So that'll be very interesting to see if Nebraska can make it out of there, how they do against Oregon State. I think that's the regional that starts on Thursday, and then the other 15 start on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. But then you've got Michigan in their pod as a 3 seed. You've got Iowa as a 4 seed in the pod under that, and then the pod directly under that on the right side of the bracket is Indiana as a 2 seed. So potentially Iowa and Michigan can meet up in that, I guess, Sweet 16 it would be, and then Indiana could also move on and eventually play, possibly the winner of Iowa-Michigan. That's best case scenario, certainly not expected. Again, Big Ten has no 1 seed. They have no regional host. So it just goes to show the disadvantage and kind of where the Big Ten stands in regard to these other teams across the country.
Yeah, that's why I was mentioning my hat's off to it. And if you could envision the Big Ten in the College World Series, I mean, think back if you've ever turned it on. I can't remember the last time that I remember watching a Big Ten team in the College World Series. Part of it is, Kevin, because of the way that this tournament is set up, that it is double elimination, which you hit it right on the head. If a good team has a bad game and gets beat by a 4 seed, well, then, yeah, they play the loser of the other game, but they can win through again, and then they just have to maybe play that team again and win twice if that team has no losses. So I like the setup, and my thought when I was seeing this, I'm like, wonder if college basketball would ever think about doing that. And then I'm like, nah, they wouldn't do that. But if it was going to make them more money, they probably would. I just like it, Kevin, because of the fact that you really do get a true best 16 teams in the College World Series when you're moving through the brackets. Now, like you said, there could be a team that gets really hot, and that is great. I would love to see those things. I love upsets. I love when there are teams that are lower seeds. Like, I'm cheering for every Big Ten team. I want them to win and go through their bracket. Probably not realistic, but at the end of the day, in college baseball, when you're watching the World Series, when it's televised, if you watch it at all, I do. I enjoy watching it on ESPN. You really do get really good baseball. You don't have, like, true Cinderellas. Like, you may have a powerhouse like a Stanford in there, or some of those West Coast teams that are traditionally in there, and Arizona and Arizona State. And I always want those teams to lose. I want those big-name teams to lose. I think one time Cal State Fullerton was in there, still a West Coast team, but kind of like that Cinderella team that slid through into the World Series final. I'm like, woo, yeah, go Fullerton. But very rare to find a Big Ten team there. So hopefully now that we've kind of jumped on their bandwagon, maybe they'll all listen to our podcast and be like, yeah, we're going to do it for Go Big or Go Home podcast. That's what we're hoping for, Kevin, because I really do enjoy watching baseball. It's just Big Ten baseball is not dominant. Good teams. By no means am I saying it's bad baseball. They got 5 teams out of 64. Best 64, just getting through that first double elimination pod of 4 is difficult because you're playing against those number 1 host seeds, and you can't lose twice. And for the Big Ten, very hard in recent years to get through and get to that final College World Series, that final group of teams. But it'll be interesting to be able to watch these teams advance. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And I was while you were talking, not that I was completely oblivious to what you were saying. I was definitely listening to every word, but no sarcasm there. But I was looking up baseball, just championship history for D1 college baseball. And unless my eyes deceived me, and I kind of went up and down a couple times to make sure I wasn't messing this up, but the last I'll ask you, Troy, when do you think the last Big Ten NCAA D1 baseball championship team won the whole thing? Coming from the Big Ten, when was the last year that happened?
I would guess 1998.
You're off by 32 years. It was 1966.
Woo! I wasn't even born then. And I think I'm old. I wasn't even born then. So there has not been a championship in my born years of life.
You're listening to the youngster and the old man, and the old man wasn't even born the last time a Big Ten team won the College Baseball World Series in Omaha, Nebraska.
Well, let's pull up the big boy pants, Big Ten. It's time to win a championship. Let's go.
And looking at runner-ups, I'm getting to 1966. Okay, so here we go. 1966. Since 1966, there has not been not one Big Ten runner-up. Not one. 1965, Ohio State was the runner-up. And then in 66, they won the whole thing. Looking back before then, Penn State, 1957, and that's it. This is going back to 1947. And before Ohio State in 66, Minnesota won it in 64, Michigan in 62, Minnesota in 60. So I guess kind of the 60s were a Big Ten baseball time. It seems like Minnesota won it in 56, Michigan in 53. So from 53 to 66, I think there were 5 Big Ten winners. I guess Big Ten baseball was in its heyday in the 50s and 60s. But since 66, there has not been a Big Ten participant in the title series. Not a runner-up, not a winner. So that's what the Big Ten's odds are in terms of, and just prevalence across the country in Big Ten baseball. It's kind of like being the Atlantic 10 in college basketball. If you kind of want to equate it, maybe once you'll have one Cinderella kind of make it through. But other than that, it's just kind of, the ACC or the Big 12 or the SEC or the Pac-12 or the Big 10 will win March Madness. It typically doesn't go to.
You don't want to be putting your money on any Big Ten teams if you're in Vegas on the College World Series. Stay away from the Big Ten. However, like I said, pull up the big boy pants Big Ten teams. Let's go. At least get to the championship game. Give Kevin and I something to talk about 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. That, first chance to win a title in, longer than I've been alive. That tells you something right there. Like, I'm old, and there hasn't been a champion since I've been alive and before I've been alive. Whew. That's amazing.
Craziness. And just not to dive deep into baseball, with college baseball here, because I don't certainly know much. I followed the Big Ten tournament a solid amount. That's my knowledge of Big Ten baseball. I know Iowa's Jake Adams is an excellent hitter. That's basically the extent of my knowledge. But Nebraska, again, the number 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament, they earned a number 2 seed. They're paired with Oregon State, the number 1 overall team. So coming out of that pot of 4 seems unlikely, but they are the number 2 seed in that pot of 4. So they could have their shot at Oregon State at least a couple times. If they get past Yale in the first round, and then Oregon State plays Holy Cross, who's 23-27 overall. I'm assuming that's the worst team in this tournament since they're playing the number 1 overall seed, and they're 23-27 overall. I'm assuming Oregon State wins that game, and if Nebraska beats Yale in their first game, they'll play Oregon State for the first time, and then if they lose, that's fine. Again, it's a double elimination thing, so they might end up playing Oregon State a few times. So those games will be interesting. That makes up the entire left side of the bracket. The right side, again, Michigan is the number 3 seed in their pod. North Carolina's the 1. Florida Gulf Coast is the 2. Michigan went 42-15 overall. Florida Gulf Coast was their opponent initially, 42-18. Obviously anything can happen there. Again, my knowledge is certainly limited. Don't quote me on Big Ten teams' opportunities to move through this tournament and to diagnose matchups and hitting matchups with certain pitchers. I can't do that whatsoever, but Michigan seems to probably not have the greatest opportunity. It seems like Florida Gulf Coast, a legitimate number 2 seed, and then again, you have a 1 seed there. So Michigan's not the favorite either. None of these Big Ten teams are favored to get to the, Sweet 16 and be regional champions, so to say. But going under Michigan, their little pot of 4 is Iowa as the 4 seed. Their 1 seed is Houston, who's 40-19. Iowa went 38-20. So just from record standpoint, not a huge difference. Obviously, Iowa has the offensive firepower that I talked about, at least mentioned for a minute or two. And I don't think Houston's probably overly dominant, although I think they're one of the top 8 seeds. So Iowa will get their shot at the 1 seed host initially. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that game. Under that pod, Indiana's the 2 seed. They went 33-22. Kentucky went 39-20. Kentucky is the 1 seed in that pot of 4. So again, Indiana as the 2 seed, much like Nebraska as the 2 seed, couldn't end up playing the 1 seed, the host of their pot of 4 pretty early on and have a few shots at them. So it'll be interesting to see the 2 seeds and what they do. It'll be interesting to see Iowa and see if they can keep up this hot streak against Houston, the number 1 seed in their pod initially. And then outside of that, you go to the bottom right corner, and there's Maryland, the only other Big Ten team. They're a 3 seed, 37-21 overall. The 1 seed in that pod, Wake Forest, went 39-18. Again, record-wise, not a huge difference. I'm assuming ACC baseball, Wake Forest played tougher competition than Maryland did. That's just my assumption. So it'll be interesting to see a couple of these 2 seeds, to see if they can play the 1 seed early on, see how they do, see if they can get a quick upset there, and then force the 1 seed to battle back, like Troy mentioned, and have to win out, basically, to get to the Sweet 16, quote-unquote. So I think that at least Indiana will have that opportunity against Kentucky. I think Nebraska can have that opportunity against Oregon State. And the other team that I'll keep my eye on, of course, is Iowa, since they just won the Big Ten tournament. They play the number 1 seed Houston in their pod right off the bat. So those 3 teams I'm interested to see. Like Troy mentioned, I plan on rooting for all these teams. That's the extent of my baseball talk, but unless there's something else you wanted to add, Troy.
Yeah, I just want to throw it to Jake Adams. And you say 27 homers, and I just want to make this reference. Most teams play, what is it, Kevin, around 55, 60 games they're at right now? It's kind of one home run every other game. Like right. One every other game. So that would be like, now, again, I don't know, but you go back to take away the Sosa-McGuire battles when they're pounding out 70 homers on the juice. You go look now in a normal major league series, 162 games, or season, but 162 games, 40 home runs is typically a fantastic home run year. That's 1 homer every 4 games. This guy's cracking about 1 every other game. That's amazing. That is amazing. This is a guy, so remember the name Jake Adams, unless he's juicing it up, and I'm not even saying anything. I'm not saying I suspect him of that. I'm just saying if this guy is that natural power, you're going to see this guy playing every day in the summer in the upcoming years. So good for Jake Adams, but that's unbelievable. 27 homers in a college season. That's like 1 every other game. That's amazing. So that's my last tidbit on baseball, and we can keep moving forward with the show, bud.
Yeah, and he's a junior. Not to say that he's, going to opt out this year and get signed by an MLB team and get drafted fairly high. I have no idea what his draft stock is at. I have no idea where any of these Big Ten players' draft stock is at for the upcoming MLB draft. I'm sure his will be fairly high since, again, the Big Ten is not a historically great baseball league, but when you have 27 homers and you're tied nationally for the lead, that's saying something, and it's saying something to have tied the most ever Big Ten home runs in a season. You're cracking him out once every game. Again, like I said, this guy's not Adam Dunn, where he's hitting 220 This is a guy who hits at least 340, and I'm sure it's probably over 350 now the Big Ten tournament's over. I'd have to double check, but he's obviously a very good player. He's only a junior. There are high school players that get picked in the MLB draft, so it's not to say that a junior is crazy young, but he still has another year of eligibility if he wants, and I'm not sure what his career home run total is at Iowa, but I'm sure he's probably fairly close if he comes back for another year to break Big Ten all-time records for home runs in a career. I'm sure he's not crazily far off after tying the most ever home runs in a single season. So,
and I'm gonna interrupt you real quick, Kevin, because I haven't done any research on this, but throwing it back to the weather that we talked about earlier in the show about baseball, it would be interesting. And again, I don't have the opportunity to do this, but to go back and see if he was off to a slow start, because you got to remember the ball's not going to carry as well when it's freezing cold out. So how many of those games were home games in Iowa where he didn't hit a homer? And what if he was playing in Florida? Could he have even cracked more? Because if he hit one solid on the sweet spot in 40-degree weather, the ball's probably not going to carry as well. I don't know. I don't know those logistics. So I wonder how much weather and playing in Iowa has actually hampered him to only have 27, if that makes any sense to you at all.
No, yeah, makes perfect sense. I mean, just looking at Major League Baseball, if you have a great hitter in Colorado, that means something as opposed to a pitcher's ballpark, that you're going to probably hit more home runs. And there are short porches, so to say, in certain fields, and you can be a left-hand hitter and face a monster in the right wall, and your home run total is just not going to be there, and you're going to have a lot of deep fly ball outs as opposed to playing in a place like Coors Field where the altitude is way up there and the ball just travels further. Again, nothing is necessarily perfectly fair. We talked about NFL overtimes on our other show, breaking down the NFL rule changes from 15-minute overtimes to 10-minute overtimes. Is it still 100% fair? No. But if you play in Colorado as a hitter, is that more fair than playing in Philadelphia or Florida or wherever? No, it's not fair. It's they're not completely equal. Any of these schedules, we're going to talk about Big Ten football and betting lines, and kind of to me, I want to break down Wisconsin a little bit. But not every team's schedule is exactly the same. And especially when you account for injuries in a given season, teams can be a lot worse than you project them to be. Teams can be a lot better. Nothing is really fair in the sports world is kind of my point here. I would have to do more, research in terms of home runs for Jake Adams and career stuff, like Troy mentioned with playing in cold weather. It would be interesting to see him at a Long Beach State or a Rice or a Houston and see what kind of numbers he would put up, a Florida State, a Florida. It'd be interesting. Would he play against better pitchers? And that would negate some of his home run totals. Obviously, the warm weather would certainly help. So there are pluses, there are minuses to playing in Iowa. Obviously, minuses being practice time, which Troy mentioned, but home runs also for the season I just pulled up. He's got 27, and Craig Dedelow of Indiana is second with 18. Third place, a guy from Illinois, has 15. So that's third place, Big Ten home runs this season, 15. Jake Adams has 27. So the guy can mash. Total bases, he has 174. That Dedelow guy from Indiana, who's second in home runs, is second with 127. So he's 47 total bases ahead of the next guy. He can mash. There's no question about it. It'll be interesting to see what he does in this tournament, and if he comes back to Iowa for next year, how high he gets taken in the draft. If he gets taken, I'm sure he'll get taken, but just a matter of where, if he'll make the jump to the majors, or at least a major league team, not necessarily to say he'll make it up to the MLB level year one, obviously, but it'll be interesting to see what Adams does and these Big Ten teams do in this NCAA tournament going forward. So we'll definitely keep up with baseball going forward. But I wanted to move over to football, Troy. And again, not that there is much Big Ten basketball or Big Ten football crazy news. If there's something that catches our eye, we'll obviously talk about it. But it is the off season for both football and basketball. And college football, I think there are games in extremely late August this year. I think like Ohio State plays a game August 30th or something. I could be off. But basically college football starts in September, and we're just getting into June. So we have to get through June. We have to get through July. We have to get through August for the most part, basically 3 months away. But so betting lines are coming out from Vegas with some of these Big Ten games, and it's interesting to see. Again, we talked about preseason rankings and how much they matter, and a lot of these bigger sites and magazines and papers are coming out with their little rankings now that, okay, it's really off-season time, and, okay, when's it time to look forward to football? So they'll come out with their rankings, and Troy said throw them out the window. They're just preseason rankings from 3 months prior to the season being out and played, which I, certainly fairly agree with. There's something to be said for teams that have a ton of talent and putting them, at the top of your list. We think it's a bunch of crap that these rankings actually do matter. I think Troy and I both agree that preseason rankings for college football should not really come out until league play begins. I'm all behind that. To me, even if you started it a couple weeks in, a month and a half into the season, 2 months into the season, and then you say, okay, now we know at least where Ohio State stacks up against a hot team like Iowa to come out of nowhere. So it's interesting to see preseason rankings and to be able to throw them out the window and these crazy early betting lines. You can't make too much of it, but it's interesting to see where Vegas, who obviously they're not, some crazy magazine site who's trying to just throw out an article because they want an article to be out there. This is Vegas putting out lines to make money. They're trying to get the betting public to bet games this early because they know the betting public doesn't have a ton of knowledge on these teams, these incoming freshmen, how good they'll be. Obviously, Vegas isn't sure either, but Vegas wins money every single year. So whether you're a bettor and you win over 50% of your bets, that's awesome. If you win 60%, that's incredible. You should be a professional bettor. So that's how hard it is to bet games. You can have all the knowledge in the world, and if you bet at around a 56 or 57% clip, that's basically what a professional does. So that's how hard it is to bet against Vegas. But so the first, or I don't think it's the first weekend, I think it's the second weekend, September 9th. Just getting into some of these games, there's not many. There are, let me look now, there are 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 13 games that I at least want to just mention and throw at you, Troy. But so, and it'll be interesting for you. For Pittsburgh, this first game, Penn State is favored by 19 points at home against Pittsburgh. What's your initial thought on that? Do you think Pittsburgh is being underappreciated here? Do you think Penn State should be 19-point favorites over Pittsburgh 3 months before the season begins?
Who the hell cares? I mean, there's my answer. Who the hell cares? It's Penn State, Pittsburgh. It's a rivalry game. It's not going to be 19 points.
Yeah.
I mean, are you taking now, I'll tell you what they're taking into account. Pittsburgh has lost their quarterback. They've lost their running back, James Conner. They've lost some offensive weapons. But it's a rivalry game, and it's game one. And this is that game. And I said it, I think it was either last show or the show before. Penn State's probably grabbing their hair right now and saying, why did we renew this rivalry? Pitt kept us out of the national championship last year. It's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. Throw the records out of the window. It's like any rivalry in any sport. I don't care. I think back to being a Packer fan in the days of the 80s when they sucked, when they won 3 games. And if they won 5, it was like winning the Super Bowl. But when they played the Bears, even though the Bears won, you didn't care. It was a rivalry game. So you throw the records out. And so, okay, Pitt has to get a new quarterback. Pitt has to get a running back. But you don't think they recruited the last 3 years? You don't think they got guys that can step in and play? Come on now. It's a rivalry game, and you're making them a 19-point favorite. So I'll say it this way. It's ludicrous, and I really can't think, why are you putting betting lines out at the beginning of June? Why? What happens to all these people coming in? What if there's an injury? I mean, I think it's ridiculous that, one, that rankings come out, two, that you put a betting line out in June. To me, it's crazy. I don't care what the line is. It's not going to be 19 points. Now, if you tell me all of a sudden that Pitt is going to start their fourth-string quarterback and their starting running back is ill and has food poisoning, oh, okay, and Penn State has all their guys, sure. And Penn State's going to be good, but I don't see Penn State beating Pitt by 19 points. Not in a rivalry game. I don't care that the game is at Penn State. Not going to be 19. Could it be double digits? Yes. I don't think it's going to be 19, though. There's my quick rant on that. So I think you know how I feel about all the rest of the games. It's going to be who the hell cares? Who cares? I don't care about a betting line in June. I'm honestly not going to care about a betting line in August. I'm really not. But it is fun. It makes for good conversation. I know there's people that bet a lot of money. There are people that make a living betting games. So for them, they probably enjoy it. And maybe they want to get in on these early lines. That's great. So if you want to take the old man's advice, take Pitt. Take Pitt and the 19 points right now if you're going to bet today.
I think Troy gave his glimpse as to what he thinks of these betting lines. And again, there are people that will take these betting lines 3 months in advance and say, okay, you know what? I agree with Troy. I don't have to have a ton of knowledge on Pitt football, Penn State football. I think the quick diagnosis for this, and these will be all quick diagnoses. It's not going to be some in-depth matchup preview for these games, but it was interesting to get Troy's perspective on that. But Penn State's going to be really good. Pittsburgh's going to be who knows what. It's a rivalry game, 19 points. You probably take the 19 points and you say, okay, I'll take the 19-point underdog because it's a rivalry game. It's Pittsburgh. It's not, West Coast Tech. It's Pittsburgh. They recruit quarterbacks. They recruit running backs. Just because you lose great ones doesn't mean a piece of crap is going to come in. It's a rivalry game. It's early in the season. Again, Penn State's going to be really good. Pittsburgh, we're not so sure. 19 points is a lot. The next one, and we'll ramble through these really quickly. I'm an Ohio State fan. Ohio State is 8-point favorites at home against Oklahoma. Both of them are national title contenders this coming year. That much is known. There's basically 7 or 8 teams that really have a legitimate shot at a national title. Not to say that no other team doesn't, and no other team will make the college football playoff. I'm sure one probably will sneak in somehow. But there are probably 7 or 8 traditional teams that are going to be really good. Penn State's one of them. Ohio State's one of them. USC is one of them. Florida State is one of them. Alabama's one of them. Oklahoma is another. There are a lot of big brand national teams that are just really good this year, and it's because they have good quarterback play, great athletes all over the field. It's just one of those years where you're not expecting a team like Texas Tech or Oklahoma State, although Oklahoma State actually is one of those dark horses that bettors will love to pick to make college football playoffs. They will pick them to win more games than they are, the over-under will say they will. These crazy lines that come out 3 months in advance, the crazy win totals that come out 3 months in advance for these teams. Oklahoma State's one of those dark horses, but the big brand traditional powers across college football are kind of all really good this year. But so Ohio State 8-point favorites over Oklahoma, I think that's a lot because I think both teams are really good, and Ohio State's at home. I think they'll win. I think Ohio State's D-line has the opportunity to be one of the best defensive lines, kind of not necessarily to say all time, but they will easily be the best Big Ten defensive line and probably easily the best defensive line in college football this year. I think Ohio State's defensive line this year will be one of the best defensive lines we'll have seen in recent history. Not to say they'll be the best ever, but they will be one of those defensive lines that can beat any other team, and Ohio State can beat any team because of their defensive line. Their secondary lost 3 guys to the NFL. Their defensive line will probably lose 3 guys to the NFL this year, and probably a couple first-rounders. There will be one really high pick, another one probably in the late first. A third could make the first round as well. That's how good Ohio State's D-line this year is. So that's my take on Ohio State, Oklahoma. Nebraska is 4-point underdogs at Oregon. The last couple of years, Oregon's been down. Nebraska's won by 4 points. All these 3 games are on September 9th that I'm reading. Again, we'll definitely breeze through the rest of these, but I wanted to get my little Ohio State take in, just knowing a lot about Ohio State. We certainly got Troy's perspective on Penn State, Pittsburgh, but any comment from you, Troy? Ohio State -8 against Oklahoma. Nebraska 4-point underdogs against Oregon after they beat Oregon the last couple of years.
Who cares? There you go. Who cares? I'm looking forward to that Ohio State-Oklahoma game. 8 points, that's a lot of points. You're talking about 2 top 10, top-tier teams, probably 2 top 4 teams, and you're going to give 8 points already? So Ohio State may win this game, but I might take – I mean, if I was a betting guy, so I guess this is where the fun of this comes in. If I was a betting guy right now, I may take Oklahoma in the 8 points. Normally a home team gets, 2.5, 3 points for playing at home? I don't see Ohio State 5 points better than Oklahoma. Ohio State's going to be really good. I mean, Ohio State could go undefeated. They got a couple tough games in there, but that's a team that could win a national championship next year. But Oklahoma's going to be darn good too. So I don't understand the 8 points this early in the season. All right, it's not even the season. It's early. So, again, who cares? So if I was a betting guy, if you want to take Old Man Troy's advice, Oklahoma and 8 points, take it now. Ohio State probably wins the game, but not by 8. Yep. They're both very good teams.
Yeah, we're in agreement. And, again, this is coming from an Ohio State fan, me, an Ohio State fan. Troy's a Wisconsin guy, but we're both very objective on our teams, and we're very hard when looking at our teams and, trying to see how they're going to do. Again, I'm an Ohio State fan. I think their defensive line will be one of the best in recent history. But to be 8-point favorites against another national title contender, legitimate national title contender, seems a bit ridiculous at this point. September 23rd, Michigan State is 4-point underdogs to Notre Dame. Notre Dame lost their quarterback. They just lost another. I believe his transfer is coming in, Malik Zaire, to Florida, so they're losing their top 2 quarterbacks. But it's September 23rd, kind of a month into the season. Michigan State underdogs by 4 points. Michigan State had a terrible year a year ago. Both these teams, it'll be interesting to see where they come from, and I think Vegas was kind of throwing a dart at this. Like, just looking at recruiting, Notre Dame might be a little ahead of Michigan State, so we'll favor them by 4. Michigan State's at home, and they're 4-point underdogs, so obviously Vegas thinks Notre Dame's better. But just, I guess, an interesting line. Not much to say, at least from my perspective there. Is there anything you have, Troy?
Well, if I take my phone off of mute, then I got a lot to say. Again, I think you know what my answer was. That's all people missed by me having the phone on mute. Who cares? I'm looking forward to Notre Dame, Michigan State, though. I mean, these are games I'm looking forward to. And for those that listen to our show every week, I like that you schedule good competition early. It can be a risk, though, the way that the playoff is set up. It can be a risk the way that the rankings are set up. But that's why I think they need to be changed. I think if you want to get better viewership of college football in September and August, you do what Ohio State did. You schedule in Oklahoma. Now, I know these schedules are made 6, 7, 8 years in advance. But who's to say if I'm looking now 8 years from now in 2025 and I'm in Wisconsin, why wouldn't I want to maybe schedule a Florida or a Texas, teams that are going to be top 25 teams? And they don't do it because they're looking at it, well, we need to have cupcakes. We need to have cupcakes. We need to win. We can't be dropping in the rankings because we're expecting to be a good team and maybe be in the top 10. So that's why they don't do it. I'm looking forward to some of these games, Kevin. And, again, the betting lines, they are what they are. I'm just looking forward. There's a lot of great games late August, early September, and I'm on board with that. And you know what? These schools, their season could be done and over if they lose. I mean, and it sucks. It really does suck for a team like a Michigan State. They lose that game, it's going to be hard for them to not that they're going to be a national contender anyway, but, you look at Penn State last year and that loss to Pittsburgh early. Who would have thought Penn State was going to do what they're going to do? So that loss killed them. It literally killed them. And that's what I'm saying. These early games, non-conference games, should not count against you when it comes to the national playoff. That's my 2 cents worth.
Yep, completely agreed. And I just simply completely agreed. These teams, I think that you're getting more Ohio State's trying to go out and play in Oklahoma. I think you're getting more Wisconsin's trying to go out and play LSU. I think you're getting more Nebraska's going out. And, 6 years ago, you look at Oregon and you say, holy cow, this is a powerhouse. Let's schedule Oregon for a home and home. Oregon's obviously taken a nosedive, but Nebraska couldn't have known that 6 years ago. So hats off to Nebraska playing Oregon. Hats off to Michigan State, always playing Notre Dame, it seems like. I think that the top-tier Big Ten teams like Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State now, Wisconsin typically, Michigan State, Nebraska, I think those teams usually will go out and play at least one good team. Like you said, they don't have to be an Oklahoma. They don't have to be a juggernaut, but be a Notre Dame, be an Oregon now. Penn State playing Pittsburgh, like you said, it's kind of a no-win scenario for Penn State. Even if you kill Pittsburgh, it's still killing a non-top 25 team. So it just is what it is. And Pittsburgh's obviously going to play you tough because it's a rivalry game, and it's Pittsburgh. It's not, a roast beef Tech. So it's interesting to see. I think you're getting more of the upper echelon teams, at least in the Big Ten, trying to go out and play one quality opponent each year in the non-conference. I look forward to it. I know last year's, I think, second weekend was extremely good. You had 6 games that featured top 15 teams, which was it was, I guess, statistically, those top 6 games last year's week 2, I think it was, week 2 or week 3, was the best weekend, quote unquote, in college football statistically from a ranking standpoint in the last 15 years. That's obviously kind of an anomaly, but I think you're getting more of these teams trying to schedule one team that's pretty dang good. And so I think the top end of the Big Ten is doing a better job at that than kind of the middle end of the Big Ten. Iowa is one of those teams that never plays anyone in the non-conference. That's just the way it is, and Iowa's been beat on for that, but some national media members as well for that, which I applaud. Because I think you should play one at least good team. Wisconsin's schedule this year, I think they're kind of favored in every single game this year. And you can say Wisconsin gets Michigan at home November 18th, the second last game of the season. You could, I guess, favor Michigan in that if you want to, going to Camp Randall. I probably don't. But so if you favor Wisconsin in that one, they're technically favored in every single game this year. And they go to BYU. That's their big non-conference game, not a huge non-conference game, but like I've talked about before on the show, at BYU, fringe top 25 team on the road, not an easy place to play. BYU always has NFL players on their roster. It's a close, fringe, not top 25 team, BYU. So you're getting a good quarterback, you're getting a good offense, you're getting NFL players at BYU. It'll be a difficult game. Wisconsin, the line for that is not on here, unfortunately. But Wisconsin's an interesting team to look at because they don't have that juggernaut on their non-conference schedule. So if they slip up once in the Big Ten, it's probably fine as long as they win the Big Ten title game. That's kind of the caveat to that, is they have to win the Big Ten title game. If you're in Ohio State and you lose to Oklahoma week 2, it's fine because even if especially if you run the rest of the table, you're going to get in if you're the top Big Ten team, as long as you don't have 3 losses or you're a bad 2-loss team, which is just unlikely to happen in the Big Ten for the foreseeable future. So the Big Ten winner should be in the college football playoff going forward for the foreseeable future because of these top-end teams being as good as they are. But I'll move right along here, finally. October 7th, Michigan is favored by 15 at home against Michigan State. That just shows how much Michigan State has dropped off in the eyes of the public in Vegas. In the last couple of years, Michigan State was a juggernaut. Last year, they won, I think it was 3 games. So Michigan State definitely took a nosedive a year ago. You see it in this Vegas line here. Wisconsin, 8-point favorites at Nebraska. That was probably the most interesting thing to me. Ohio State, 8-point favorites over Oklahoma week 2. That was interesting. But Wisconsin at Nebraska favored by 8. that's higher than I thought it was. Your quick thought, Troy?
Who cares? There we go. Who cares all day? That's crazy. Wisconsin going to Nebraska. That is, being a Wisconsin fan, Nebraska always plays the Badgers tough. I know there's been some blowouts, and I know there's been some lopsided games, but Wisconsin-Nebraska, since Nebraska has joined the Big Ten, that's been a tough game. And now the Badgers have to travel to Nebraska. So you're giving the road team 8 points now. So take Nebraska and the 8 points if you're listening to Old Man Troy and you want to bet now. I don't think Nebraska is going to beat Wisconsin, but Wisconsin has to travel. And winning on the road in the Big Ten is not an easy task. And winning, especially when you're the Badgers, at Nebraska has never been an easy task. So I don't know where they come up with these lines. Are they basing it just off roster and how good a team is supposed to be? Yeah, Wisconsin's supposed to be darn good. Nebraska, they could pull off an upset here and there. Hopefully one of those upsets isn't against Wisconsin, which it very well could be at home. That game scares me as a Badger fan, Kevin. I'm circling that game because that is a game, and I'll say it right now, at the end of May, beginning of June, Nebraska could beat Wisconsin during the regular season. I don't care who's on the roster. I don't care what the records are. When Wisconsin goes to Nebraska, Nebraska could beat Wisconsin. Now you're going to give Wisconsin 8 points. Take Nebraska and the 8 points because they could beat them straight up. No points involved. That's my quick thought there.
Again, completely agreed. The line seems favored toward Wisconsin pretty heavily, and we're not really sure why. I think Wisconsin's a top 15 team. I think Michigan's a top 15 team. I think Nebraska's a fringe top 25 team. 8 points seems like a lot on the road. Wisconsin's not this dominating team that should go into Nebraska and, if they cover, basically win by 10 points. You're asking for a Wisconsin team to go into Nebraska and pretty much control the game, win by 10 points, get out of there, and win the Vegas line. So it seems like a lot. Penn State, one of those juggernauts considered this year, October 21st, 14-point favorites over Michigan. Again, I think Vegas is really falling in love with the Big Ten. Yeah, there we go. There's a big reaction from Troy on one of these lines. Here we go. Penn State 14-point favorite over Michigan.
Okay. I might have to go find money and start betting. Now, if I bet now, do I get that line? Do I get that line now? Is it locked in for that game if I bet now? I don't know. I'm not a bettor. I've never bet on a game ever in my life. But are you serious? Penn State 14 points over Michigan?
That's my knowledge of it.
Michigan could beat Penn State straight up.
Yep.
Oh, my God. I got to find some money. I don't know how betting works, but I got to find some money. That's crazy. Continue. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was looking for a big reaction from you, and that obviously got it. So that's kind of my little point here. Again, I won't go into left field with everything, but Penn State, I think Vegas is heavily favoring the top 2 teams in the Big Ten. I think, at least I talked about this, that 4 teams in the Big Ten could finish top 10 this year in college football. That's why I call the Big Ten the best conference in college football, because you have 4 teams that can finish in the top 10. You've got 2 legitimate title contenders, Penn State, Ohio State. Obviously, Vegas is kind of agreeing with me. They favor Ohio State by 8 over Oklahoma. They favor Penn State by 14 at home over Michigan. Penn State, Nebraska, I wouldn't have picked as a 14-point game.
I could see giving Penn State the 3 points for being the home team. I could see a 3.5-point line there. I could really see that. But 14? Come on now. Somebody had to be smoking something crazy over there.
Penn State, I think Penn State, again, this is my diagnosis, is that Ohio State, Penn State, legitimate title contenders. I think Michigan certainly has some question marks. I think Wisconsin has some question marks. I think Wisconsin's probably, I guess I would favor Wisconsin over Michigan, neutral site, barely. But I don't think Wisconsin's an unbelievable team. I think they can finish top 10 like Michigan. I think there's a big difference, again, in the big brand teams that are really good, like Penn State, Ohio State, USC, Florida State, Bama. Those top teams, I'm missing a couple, but those top teams are kind of the real threats to win the whole thing, and I'd be very surprised if one of those big brand national powers didn't win it this year, because there is 6 or 7 of them that are supposed to be extremely good. Oklahoma's another one of them. That's why I was surprised with Ohio State being 8-point favorite.
Let me ask you this, Kevin. Didn't Penn State beat Michigan last year?
Let me quickly check. I believe they did.
Yes, the answer is yes. You don't think Jim Harbaugh is going to pull up something and go there and kick the crap out of them?
Actually, Troy,
good
Troy,
coach.
Penn State went to Michigan last year and lost 49-10.
Oh,
I forgot about that. Michigan, it was one of those weird games because it was kind of a 3-way tie a year ago, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, and it's like, well, wait, Michigan completely dismantled Penn State, and then Penn State beat Ohio State. Ohio State beat Michigan.
Penn State beat Ohio State. That's what I was.
Yep. It was one of those
Either
weird.
case, Michigan is Jim Harbaugh at Michigan makes Michigan a team that can win any game they play. It's not like he sits on his hands and says, "Oh, maybe I'll recruit today." Come on now, you got me all worked up now with this 14-point line. You got my brain so I can't even think right.
Michigan beat Penn State last year by 39 points. Michigan takes a little step back. Penn State takes a little step up. And now Penn State's favored by 14. They lost by 39 a year ago.
We're just going to leave it at that. We're just going to leave it at that.
We'll leave it right there.
Yeah.
The week following.
I'm so worked up I got cotton mouth now.
The week following, after Penn State plays Michigan, Penn State has to travel to Ohio State. What do you think the line is for that one, Troy?
Penn State at Ohio State. Ohio State by 7.5.
Ooh, look at Troy. See, Troy should be Vegas. Vegas should not be Vegas. Troy should be Vegas. Ohio State's favored by 8.5. So extremely close. I give you props for that one. Let me put it this way. Penn State at home against Michigan, without looking at the line, I would have said Penn State favored by 7. I think Penn State should have been favored by more than Troy does in that instance. But, again, as we mentioned, Michigan beat Penn State by 39 a year ago. Ohio State, 8.5-point favorites over Penn State. That's a lot. Again, like Troy said, you give 3.5 points to the home team. But so Ohio State, Vegas sees Ohio State as 5 points better than Penn State at the least. That's a big number. I think, personally, that Vegas sees Ohio State as a top 2 team because another national title contender, Penn State, they're favored by 8.5. Another national title contender, Oklahoma, they're favored by 8. I like Ohio State a lot this year, but there are question marks, especially with J.T. Barrett's passing game and taking out Curtis Samuel, their top weapon from a year ago.
There's question marks, Kevin, on, not to interrupt, but there's question marks for every team right now. Yeah. There's going to be question marks until October. And even in October, there could be an injury, so there could be more question marks. That's why I'm okay talking about this, and I get all worked up because I think it's ridiculous, but every team has a question mark today. If there's a team that can honestly say on June 1st, this is my team, and this is exactly what we're going to do, well, you're probably going to go 0-12.
Yeah. Craziness with some of these lines to move. Well, my Vegas sense on that, take Penn State and 8.5 points. I mean, I'm an Ohio State fan. I've taken Oklahoma in the points. I've taken Penn State in the points against Ohio State. Troy is a Wisconsin fan. Troy took Nebraska plus the 8 points against Wisconsin. Like I've said, we're very proactive, and I think we're very intelligent fans, if I do say so myself, on our teams. We are critical of our teams. We may be a little too critical on our favorite teams. So we are not at all biased towards saying, hey, Ohio State's going to be unbelievable. Of course they're going to beat Penn State by 8 and Oklahoma by 8. That's not my take whatsoever. Troy, like he said, every team has question marks. Even those top 7 or 8 teams that are expected to be the big brand favorites this year because they're all supposed to be really good with their good quarterbacks and whatnot, they still have question marks somewhere. So it's interesting to see these big lines. November 11th, Wisconsin is 17-point favorites at home against Iowa. Thoughts?
No. No. Stay in mute. I think everybody knows where I am with this. I'm working myself up. It's just crazy. You really got me going. Now I think you're doing it on purpose. No comment. No comment. The old man has no comment.
There are big lines to be had, and I think Troy is disagreeing with all of them. Northwestern, November 18th, 6-point favorites over Minnesota. Take that for what it is. November 24th, Nebraska, 3-point favorites over Iowa. Take that for what it is.
Whoa, there's a normal line right there. A normal 3-point line? You got to be kidding me. Are you reading it right? Are you sure it's not 33? I know You're young, you've got good eyes, but are you reading it wrong? Because that's like the most normal line I've heard today.
I know. I'm with you. That's why I wanted to bring up this topic, was because there were some very interesting lines to be had, even though it's 3 months ahead of the season. November 25th, the final regular season day for the Big Ten, Ohio State at Michigan. Ohio State is favored by 8 points, and Wisconsin goes to Minnesota, and they're favored by 10. Again, big numbers to be had. That's all I have for college football.
So you're telling me there's a line for the end of November?
Yep.
Just had to do some math. 6 months from now, do you say Wisconsin 10-point favorite over Minnesota?
At Minnesota. Yep.
Wisconsin has had Minnesota's number, but that's the game for the Axe. And again, it's one of that's going to be the rivalry week game for the Axe. So are you really going to take Wisconsin in the points? You could. I mean, that's one of those games. It's a November game. You don't know what's happening in September and October. Wisconsin could gel and be really good defensively again. And could be just like a shutdown, run-stopping team. And, yeah, maybe then take Wisconsin by 10. How do you take Wisconsin by 10 now? Everything else equal, without any games played. You can't. You can't do it. That's crazy. I'm done. I'm done with these lines.
That's it. Those are all the lines I have. Again, I wanted to bring up the point because we're 3 months away from the season, and you've got Penn State favored by 19 against a rival. You've got Ohio State favored by 8 and 8.5 against other national title contenders. You've got Wisconsin huge favorites. You've got Michigan as huge favorites against Michigan State. Huge lines are had, and I think it goes to show at least 3 months ahead of the season that, again, this is Vegas. This isn't a bunch of crap. This isn't a magazine. This isn't a sports site expert. This is Vegas. They're trying to make money off you. They do every single year. So they're right much more often than they are wrong, and that's why these lines are where they're at. So, of course, Vegas is wrong during certain points, and that will be proven every single season, every single sport. But they're interesting for 3 months ahead of time to see some of these lines where they're at and how much they love Ohio State, apparently, and how much they love Penn State, but not nearly as much as Ohio State. And they favor Wisconsin a lot. It seems like Vegas favors Wisconsin to go undefeated this year. That was the last thing. That was the last thing I had with this college football topic was Wisconsin's biggest games at BYU week 3. They go at Nebraska week 5. They have Iowa at home. They have Michigan at home. They travel to Minnesota to close the year. To me, they should be favored in every single game.
Well, and I'll say this, Kevin. Wisconsin's schedule is pretty favorable for them to have an appearance in the Big Ten championship game. It really is. But, again, you don't know what's going to happen. But from the outside looking in, on paper and what they have on their roster, they should have a legitimate chance to be in the Big Ten championship game. So, we look at these lines. Your task is to save today's line. And then as we get to the season, we're going to revisit this as we do this show, and we're going to laugh at everybody in Vegas. We're literally going to laugh at them because I can't see that these are going to be legitimate lines when the season starts. It's crazy. It's unbelievable. We had just taken a topic that is so ridiculous and turned it into like 45 minutes. We had another topic about the NBA draft, but we're going to have to get to that next week because we've now been talking for long over an hour. And we could just go on. and you got me all worked up. Again, I think you did it on purpose, and that's okay. But for the worked up old man, I am with Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter. Hope you enjoyed the show today, everyone. We'll get back with you next week. Have a good day, and if you're a betting person, get to the site, get to Vegas, put some money down on these ridiculous lines. Have a good day, everyone.
Go Buckeyes.